want to talk to you about edging, whether it's edging on a little path or edging between the grass and the flower bed. And if you look down here, you can see that the grass is starting to grow in here. But if I give it a jab with my shovel and a little turn with my shovel, then I make this edge, which makes it easier to mow, and it also finishes off the garden. In other words, it's like establishing a mat or a frame to a painting. You get this dark border and it makes it look neat. As you can see, my garden is kind of like an English garden, a cottage garden in which there's everything blending together, which is what I like. That's my preference rather than a more formal garden. But it needs to have that edge in order for the plants to be separated from the grass. The grass will choke out the plants. Their roots are very aggressive, and you can see if I jab in the shovel like this, I'm cutting out some of the grass roots that would grow down in here. And I'm also getting rid of the stems of the grasses and any ground ivy that goes in. This is the ground ivy here. It's on the invasive list, but it is a pretty blue color in the springtime. And I'm separating it so that I have this nice little area in which nothing grows and the lawnmower can come through. And, well, I usually have to swing the lawnmower over, but ideally if you had it banked up enough, the lawnmower wheel could go here and the mower cutter would be here. But it often shaves off this part because it's uneven. Now in the springtime, what I do is I take my compost and I put it on the border here before I put it into the bed, because it usually has some weed seeds in it, and if I do that, the weed seeds start to sprout, and then they're easy to get rid of as I just swipe them back and forth with the shovel. But if I put them inside where I don't weed usually, well, if I see something, I weed it. But for the most part, I don't get in to my flower beds, which are sown closely. They're packed in there, and the weeds really don't grow. So that's another advantage of having this border, is that your weeds are out of there because the compost has been swished back and forth before it's put into the rest of the flowers to nourish them. This plant has grown too close to the grass, and so I'm going to take it out. And there's a couple here that I can either give away or transplant it to someplace else in the garden. I'll have to take some of the grass out too, because I don't want to make these borders too wide. I mean, take out too much grass. But as you can see, I'm getting a big hunk of grass and a big hunk of plant. Now this next plant here is another one that Sydney Edison talked to me about that makes a nice border. It stays low, except it has a tall pink flower that isn't very pretty, and she cuts hers off. But the lamb's ear, which this is, lamb's ear, is a nice texture. It's soft and fuzzy, and it provides a nice blue-green as opposed to the yellow-green of most of the rest of the plants. And by the way, in Connecticut, most of our plants are acid-loving, and the strong acid rains have come over from Chicago area, so that most of our soil is now acid. But plants and their pH are a big part of gardening. I trust that the moss, which I find throughout, is an indicator that it's acidic, and therefore I haven't gone to the agricultural center to make sure that the acidity is close to what the plant requires. But so far my plants have survived, and with all of this little bit of weeding that I do when I'm down here, I'm able to have some pretty steady blooms throughout the summer. Which brings me to another point, and that is that pollinators need a steady bloom. I'll talk more about that later, but for now, I'm Pat Barkman. If you like this video, please press like, and I'll see you next time.